In this video, we're going to learn about Saudi Arabia and Qatar relations, how it reached to a level of diplomatic crisis where the entire Gulf country imposed an embargo on Qatar. We will also learn what are the differences between Qatar and Gulf countries. I will also speak a little bit about Qatar and Iran's growing relations, and in the end, we will end this video by answering the question why Saudi Arabia reopened its space and borders to Qatar and ended the dispute which started in 2017. There's a lot to cover, so without any further ado, let's begin. Saudi Arabia has reopened its airspace and borders to Qatar after a long dispute. Here is Saudi Arabia, and here is Qatar. Qatar is basically a peninsula, that means it is surrounded by water on three sides. The capital of Qatar is Doha, and the population of the city is close to 30 lakhs. The capital of Saudi Arabia is Riyadh, and the population of the city is close to 3.5 crore. As we know, Qatar is a peninsula, that means it is surrounded by the Persian Gulf on three sides. On the south, it shares the border with Saudi Arabia, and in north, Qatar shares maritime border with Iran in the Persian Gulf. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is the largest Arab nation in the Middle East. It covers about 80% of the Arabian Peninsula. The country is bordered by Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Oman and Yemen. Now that you have gained some geographic clarity about Saudi Arabia and Qatar, let me explain why these two countries do not like each other. We have to go back to 1971. Qatar got independence on September 3rd, 1971 from Great Britain. After becoming an independent country, Qatar and Saudi had a border dispute because there was no clear defined boundary in this part of the Arabian Peninsula. In fact, after Qatar, the UAE got independence on 2nd December 1971 from Great Britain. Within a span of 3 months, two independent countries emerged. So obviously Britain made mistakes while drawing the border line, which the Saudis did not like. That is not something new when it comes to British. They always do a terrible job in drawing territorial boundaries. Anyhow, this border dispute between Saudi and Qatar went on for over 30 years and got finally settled in 2001. But another reason behind the conflict between Saudi and Qatar was the launching of the satellite TV network called Al Jazeera in 1996. It is headquartered in Doha, Qatar. It became the first English language news channel to be headquartered in the Middle East. The Saudis and other Sunni Arab nations' governments view Al Jazeera's reporting as politically motivated in causing instability in the region. In fact, the 2011 Arab Spring movement was widely reported by this news channel. And if you all remember the Arab Spring movement, it was a series of anti-government protests that was aimed to bring down long-term dictators who ruled these countries for a long time. In other words, the Arab Spring was a pro-democracy protest sponsored by the Western countries with the aim of changing the regime and extending their political influence in the Arab world. During the Arab Spring movement, Saudi Arabia was not immune to it. After all, the Saudi Arabian royal family practically runs the entire country. So naturally, any kind of spark from the Arab Spring movement or the pro-democracy movement can also cause instability in Saudi Arabia. All you need is a tool to spread information widely. Al Jazeera was already doing that. As a result, in 2011, a small region in Saudi Arabia near the eastern province of Qatif, here a massive pro-democracy protest erupted and went on for almost a decade. This region is primarily occupied by Shias, and we all know that the majority in Saudi Arabia are Sunni Muslims. So this is why the Saudis and other Sunni Arab nations' governments view Al Jazeera's reporting as politically motivated in causing instability in the region, and also blamed Qatar for causing the Arab Spring pro-democracy protests. Now everyone is aware of the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran don't get along. They are rivals. That is the topic of another video, but I will explain in short. Saudi Arabia and Iran are two powerful neighbors in the Middle East, and they are constantly fighting for regional dominance. The fight between Saudi and Iran is often called as the Cold War of the Middle East. They each follow one of the two main branches of Islam. Iran is largely Shia Muslim, while Saudi Arabia sees itself as the leading Sunni Muslim power. In the whole of Middle East, where the countries have Shia or Sunni majorities, they all look towards Iran or Saudi Arabia for support and guidance. And you also must be aware of the fact that Saudi Arabia is home to the birthplace of Islam. So naturally, the monarch of Saudi Arabia sees himself as the leader of the Muslim world. But this idea was challenged in 1979 by the Islamic Revolution in Iran. In 1979, what happened was the Shah of Iran was removed by his own people and the leader fled. In his place arrived Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and he brought a new sense of purpose to establish Iran as a regional power through Shia Islam. That sent shockwaves through the Sunni Muslim world, and in particular Saudi Arabia, which had traditionally seen itself as the leader of the Muslim world. At the core of that belief is the fact that the kingdom is the guardian of the two holiest places in Islam, Mecca and Medina. Now have a look at this map. This shows the distribution of Shia and Sunni Muslim population across the Middle East and Northern African countries. If you look at the Sunni majority countries, in the last 20 years, the United States has waged war on Afghanistan, South Sudan, Yemen, and the Northern Africa, that is through Arab Spring. The United States, along with NATO countries, has gone after all these countries one by one and have done numerous airstrikes and changed their regime. But then if you see, they did not go after Saudi Arabia. Ideally, United States should have introduced liberalism and democracy to Saudi Arabia as well, but it did not. And it is a well-known fact that Saudi Arabia is a natural strategic ally of the United States. So United States needs Saudi for its own interest. That is why the US has around 5 military bases in Saudi. Now have a look at Syria and Iraq. The United States and NATO countries have also waged war against Syria and Iraq. Due to that, majority of the population of these countries have fled to the European Union. And that's how European crisis emerged. Anyhow, Iraq is the neighbor of Iran. Iraq is a Shia majority country. It was not always like that. It happened after the 1999 Shia revolution and then after the death of Saddam Hussein in 2006. Coming to Syria, although Syria is a Sunni majority country, but its president Bashar al-Assad belongs to the Alawite sect, which follows the Shia Islam. Naturally, Iran being a Shia Muslim nation, it backs other Shia Muslim groups by financing and equipping armed groups and backing sympathetic regimes like that of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Iran calls it a support of their brotherhood. Now, Iran firmly believes that the US and the other Western powers have exploited the Middle East for a very long time and have also ruined relationships between Shias and Sunnis for their own political interests. And Iran is also aware of the fact that Saudi Arabia is a strategic partner with the Western powers. That is why US and Iran don't get along, and in return the United States has imposed decades of sanctions on Iran. Now coming to Qatar, it lies in the Persian Gulf, in between Saudi and Iran. If you see, Qataris are largely Sunni Muslims. Now the question is, why Saudi and other Sunni Arab governments have problem with Qatar? For this, you have to understand the differences between Qatar and other Gulf countries. When we say Gulf countries, it includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Qatar. Iran also shares its border with the Persian Gulf, but Iran is on the eastern side, so I am not including it in Gulf countries. Now all the Gulf countries apart from Iran has majority of Sunni Muslims, including Qatar. But the differences between Qatar and other Gulf countries began in 2011 after the Arab Spring in Egypt, when there was an election and the Muslim Brotherhood Group, a Sunni Islamist organization, came to power. Mohammed Morsi was elected as Egypt's president, but Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries were against this government because he was a liberal politician. Saudi and other Sunni Arab nations' governments did not like it, while Qatar supported it. And not to mention, the predecessor of current leader of Qatar had set up Al Jazeera, which resulted in Qatar being the only Islamic country with a big media empire that is influential across the world, particularly in the Western world. So Qatar, despite being a Sunni Muslim country, it was liberal when it came to setting up Al Jazeera and supporting Egypt's president Mohammed Morsi. Now you also have to understand that Qatar is also one of the richest countries in the world per capita because it is the largest exporter of liquefied gas. Qatar gets its oil and gas from the fields in South Pars and North Dome, where it shares the oil and gas field with Iran. Now because it shares oil and gas field with Iran, plus Qatar is a little liberal when it comes to doing business, the rest of the Gulf countries demanded that Qatar should cut ties with Iran and also shut down its TV network. The Gulf countries also demanded Qatar to cut ties with many rebel groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. If you notice, all these rebel groups are either anti-Western Shia as well as Sunni groups who have been designated as militant groups by the Western power or by the Saudis and other Sunni Arab countries' governments. However, Qatar refused to surrender to these demands, and in 2017, Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies imposed a blockade on Qatar and cut all diplomatic ties. Then obviously Qatar needed help. It was Turkey and Iran who immediately answered the call. Iran opened its airspace and sea routes to Qatar because if you look at Iran's coastline, it is long enough to let Qatari transportation easily move out into the Indian Ocean. This is how Qatar and Iran's relations started developing after 2017. In fact, Al Jazeera stopped criticizing Iran's interference in Iraq, Syria and elsewhere and began to openly criticize Saudi and other Gulf countries' role in Yemen conflict. So that is how Qatar's foreign policy started embracing Iran and started drifting away from its Gulf neighbors. But you also have to understand that Qatar's relation with Iran is not that open, it is conservative. Why? Because Qatar cannot risk drawing United States attention while being close to Iran. Qatar is also home to the largest US military base in the region. In addition to that, there is also a Turkish military installation. That means Qatar heavily relies on the military muscle of bigger powers for its physical security. So Qatar has to be very careful in building relation with Iran. So far it is not so deep and strategic. But the moment it goes to that level, America will interfere and impose sanctions on Qatar. Imposing sanctions is a classic move by the United States because it makes a country weak over a period of time. Once a country becomes weak, there will be internal conflict. And that is when United States steps in and takes over. That is what United States is trying to do with Iran. So in a nutshell, Qatar has to figure out what is in its country's best interest. As I've said before, in international relations there are no such things as permanent enemies and friends. There's only permanent interests. And every country has certain weaknesses. You can only push a country to a certain limit. So with the presence of US military base in Qatar and also the fact that Qatar cannot escape from the reality that all the Gulf countries will forever be its neighbors, one can easily imagine that Qatar is playing with both sides so that it benefits from all outcomes. That is how we can also come to this conclusion that Qatar, being a tiny country, is trying hard to be a powerhouse in the Middle East when it comes to its foreign policy. And now we have also seen in the news that Saudi Arabia has reopened its airspace and borders to Qatar, which was blocked since 2017. It is said that the reason behind lifting this embargo is due to the fact that the Gulf countries believe that there has to be unity among the Gulf countries, which includes Qatar, for isolating United States' enemy Iran. Now United States presidency is going to change, and you also have to understand that everyone is trying to play off each other. Even Saudi Arabia has some concerns. What if United States under the new presidency tries to capitalize Qatar and Iran's relations? Similarly, even Qatar has concerns with United States foreign policy in the Middle East. As far as Iran is concerned, it doesn't really matter. They have to face United States anyhow, and they are determined in doing that. Plus, Iran has around 2,440 kilometers long coastline in the Persian Gulf. If that is not enough, Iran has an additional 740 km of coastline along the Caspian Sea in the north. The Caspian Sea region is one of the oldest oil-producing areas in the world and is an increasingly important source of global energy production. The area has significant oil and natural gas reserves, so Iran is self-sufficient as far as its energy requirement is concerned. Now, as far as nuclear technology is concerned, we all know who the big powers are when it comes to nuclear weapons. These countries are also veto countries, and they built and tested their nuclear explosive devices before 1st January 1967. To prevent any other country from having nuclear weapons, the United States came up with something called the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Apart from these 5 veto countries, Israel has never confirmed or denies the existence of its nukes, but they are a nuclear state. India and Pakistan are nuclear states, but they have never joined the NPT. North Korea left the NPT agreement in 2003. And now coming to Iran, although Iran started its nuclear program in the 1950s, but it has always said that its nuclear energy program is meant for civil and peaceful purpose. But as usual, the United States and European Union does not believe that, and they have imposed many sanctions on Iran since 2010. Iran has made a deal with the United States and the European Union back in 2015, wherein Iran is ready to sign a deal to curb its nuclear energy program in exchange for trade. It's a bit funny. If you notice, United States is okay with Israel having nuclear weapons in the Middle East, but when it comes to Iran, it is not fine. And if you see, it is also in the best interest of Israel that no other country in the Middle East should have nuclear weapons apart from them. And everyone knows that Israel is a close ally of the United States. Likewise, Israel's nuclear weapon in turn becomes the main reason for Iran's nuclear program. Basically, Iran wants to be the sole nuclear armed state in the Middle East, and United States supports that. So Qatar has to figure out what is in its country's best interest and how strategically it can place itself in the middle of the Gulf countries, Iran and the United States. So that is what makes any international relations issue complicated. I hope you found this video informative. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching it.